When my daughter-in-law pressed those house keys into my palm, I thought it meant trust. Looking back now, I realize it was the beginning of losing everything I'd built. I remember that morning clearly. The air smelled of fried eggs and paint thinner. She'd been cleaning the kitchen cupboards again, humming like nothing in the world could touch her. I was halfway through packing up my clothes because I'd decided to move in with my old friend Lillian for a few months. I thought giving the kids space would help them settle as a young couple. "Don't worry, Mom," she said, setting the keys on the counter. "You'll always have a place here." Her smile was soft, careful. I took the keys, believing her. That was 8 months ago. Back then, my life still had rhythm. I woke before sunrise, fed the birds that nested by the window, and made tea the way my late husband used to, strong, with a pinch of cardamom. The house had that quiet kind of warmth that takes years to build. Every corner carried a memory. The notch in the dining table where my son Ethan carved his initials, the faded mark on the hallway wall where he measured his height each birthday. When Ethan married Nora, I wanted so much to like her. She was sharp, pretty in that polished way city girls are, always neat, always composed. She worked at a law office downtown, carried herself with confidence that sometimes made me feel like a guest in my own home. But I told myself she just needed time to fit into our slower life here. Ethan adored her, and when he smiled, I forgot my doubts. So, when they asked to stay in the old house while saving for their own, it felt natural to say yes. "It's yours," I told them. "Just treat it kindly." I even paid for the small repairs, patched the roof, and had the garden trimmed so they could start their life comfortably. I thought I was doing a good thing, a mother's duty. I didn't realize generosity can sometimes blind you. For the first few months after I moved in with Lillian, everything seemed fine. She lived just 10 minutes away, and I'd visit the house every weekend to drop off groceries or bake with Ethan. The rooms looked different each time. New curtains, furniture rearranged. But I chalked it up to Nora's taste. She liked things modern, sleek. My old floral drapes disappeared. My heavy oak chairs were replaced with glass and metal ones. "We're just refreshing things," Ethan said, laughing. I remember touching the cool surface of that new glass table and thinking, well, as long as they're happy. But soon, little things started feeling off. The spare bedroom, my room when I visited, suddenly became the storage room. My family photos vanished from the walls, replaced by framed prints of city skylines. When I asked where the photos were, Nora said they were in a box somewhere, her voice polite but clipped. Still, I didn't want to stir trouble. After all, it was just decoration, right? Then, one Sunday afternoon, I came by with a tray of shepherd's pie, Ethan's favorite, and found a "for sale" sign leaning against the front porch. I froze. Nora stepped outside, wiping her hands on a towel, smiling like nothing was strange. "Oh, that's for the neighbors," she said lightly. "They borrowed it while repainting their fence." It sounded absurd, but I laughed anyway, choosing to believe her, maybe because I wanted peace more than truth. After that day, I began noticing how little I knew about what was happening behind those doors. Ethan started answering my calls less often. "Busy, Mom," he'd say, his voice distant. Nora texted instead of speaking. Lillian told me, "Something's not right, Ruth. You should check the property papers." But I brushed it off. What kind of mother suspects her own son and daughter-in-law of deceit? By November, I rarely visited. The air had turned sharp, carrying the smell of cold earth and wet leaves. I spent my days knitting blankets for the church drive, keeping my hands busy so my thoughts wouldn't wander to that uneasy feeling in my chest. Then one night, just before Christmas, Ethan came over unannounced. He looked thinner, worn out, his wedding ring glinting under the kitchen light as he rubbed his hands together. "Mom," he started, "Nora and I are thinking of moving closer to the city. Her job's getting demanding, and it's just hard commuting every day." I nodded slowly. "Of course, son. Do what you must. Just let me know when you're settled." He hesitated. "About the house. We might need to make some changes. Maybe rent it out." That's when I should have asked more. Instead, I smiled, patted his arm and said, "You know best." He left soon after, promising to call. A week later, he didn't come for Christmas dinner. No message, no call. I placed 2 extra plates on the table anyway, foolishly hopeful. Snow fell outside, thick and silent, muting the world in white. The house felt emptier than ever. Lillian said, "You've given them too much space, Ruth." Maybe she was right, but when love is involved, boundaries blur. You forgive small slights because family is supposed to mean something. I didn't know it then, but that December night marked the last time I would think of that house as mine. It was late January when the first real crack showed. A brown envelope arrived at Lillian's house, addressed to me in bold black ink. No return name, just the words, "Property statement enclosed." I assumed it was another routine notice from the city about taxes. I almost tossed it aside. But something about the weight of it, the way my name looked, printed instead of handwritten, made my stomach tighten. Inside was a letter from the county office, confirmation of a change in ownership request for my home. My name was gone. In its place, Ethan and Nora Willis. For a long time, I just sat at the kitchen table staring at the paper. The walls felt like they were shrinking, the ticking clock suddenly too loud. Lillian found me there 20 minutes later, still clutching that letter. "Ruth," she said gently, "what is it?" Quote. My voice sounded far away when I answered. "It says my house isn't mine anymore." She read it twice, her brows knitting tighter each second. "Did you sell it?" Quote. I shook my head. Of course not. I only gave them the keys. I never. My throat caught before I could finish. That night, I didn't sleep. I kept picturing every moment I'd handed over trust, like a wrapped gift. The day I signed temporary power papers for Ethan so he could manage some repairs. The morning Nora brought me coffee and asked for my signature on some utilities forms. I hadn't read them closely. Why would I? She was family. The next day, I went straight to the county office. The clerk, a young man with wire-rimmed glasses, typed my address into his computer. His eyes flicked up at me. "Yes, ma'am. The property was transferred last October. Full sale recorded." "Sale?" My heart thudded. "To whom?" "Joint owners, Ethan and Nora Willis. Title cleared and finalized." He looked at me like I should know what that meant, but I didn't. Not until I saw the sale price listed on the document, just a fraction of what the house was worth. It felt like being punched in the chest. When I left that office, the winter sun had turned harsh and white. I walked home slowly, the sound of my boots crunching on the frost the only thing keeping me grounded. That evening, I called Ethan. Straight to voicemail. I texted him, "We need to talk, it's important." No reply. I waited a day, then another. Finally, I drove to the house. But when I turned into the driveway, my hands froze on the steering wheel. The for sale sign that Nora had once brushed off was planted firmly in the yard now. This time, not leaning, not borrowed. Fresh paint, bold letters. The curtains were different, too. I could tell someone else was living there. A dog barked from inside, a sound I'd never heard before. When the door opened, a middle-aged man stepped out. "You must be Mrs. Willis," he said kindly. "We just moved in last week. Lovely place." I opened my mouth, but no sound came. I stood there, trembling in the cold, realizing that everything inside those walls, my late husband's chair, my wedding china, my photographs, was gone. That night, Lillian tried to make me eat soup. I couldn't. The spoon shook in my hand. "They sold it," I whispered. "My son and his wife sold my home." Lillian reached across the table and squeezed my fingers. "Then you'll fight back, Ruth. You didn't raise that boy to forget where he came from." "But how do you fight your own blood?" The next few days blurred together. Calls to lawyers, banks, offices. Most told me the same thing. If I had signed any transfer documents, even unknowingly, the sale was likely legal. When I finally reached Ethan, he sounded tired, defensive. "Mom, please, let's not make this ugly," he said. "It was Nora's idea, but we did it for you. The maintenance was too much. You needed money." "I needed my home," I said quietly. He sighed. "You'll get your share. We'll make sure you're taken care of." Taken care of. As if I were a burden, not the woman who'd kept that roof over his head all his life. After that call, I sat on Lillian's porch until the stars came out. I couldn't cry. I just kept hearing his voice, calm, detached, rehearsed. It wasn't only the betrayal that hurt. It was how easily he said it, as though love and loyalty could be sold too. That week, I started keeping a notebook. Every conversation, every document, every memory I could recall about the house. I didn't know yet what I'd do with it, but writing helped me breathe. Lillian said, "You're getting ready, whether you know it or not." She was right. I didn't want revenge. I wanted truth, for Ethan to face what he'd done, and for Nora to understand that a house is not just wood and nails. It's history, sweat, and love. And so, I made a quiet plan. It took me 2 weeks to gather the courage to confront them face to face. 2 weeks of sleepless nights, of reading old letters from Ethan's childhood, of replaying every small sign I'd missed, the polite distance in Nora's smile, the way Ethan's hugs had grown shorter. I kept asking myself, how could they? On a cold February morning, I drove to the apartment address listed on the property document, the one they'd given the county as their mailing address. I remember gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles went white. The building was new, sleek, glass walls and steel balconies, the kind of place that looked too expensive for the sun I remembered. I rang the bell twice before Nora opened the door. Her eyes widened for a second, then smoothed into that polite, polished calm she wore like perfume. "Ruth," she said, her tone sugary. What a surprise. I didn't bother with pleasantries. "I want to know why you sold my house." For a moment, the mask slipped. Her lips pressed together, eyes darting toward the hallway where I heard Ethan's voice. He appeared seconds later, barefoot, holding a mug of coffee. "Mom?" His voice faltered. "Don't mom me," I said quietly. "You signed my name on legal papers. You took what wasn't yours to take." He glanced at Nora, then looked down. "We didn't mean for it to happen like this." I stepped inside, ignoring Nora's attempt to block the doorway. The apartment smelled of new furniture and scented candles. Nothing of home. "Then how exactly did it happen?" I asked. Nora folded her arms. "You gave us power of attorney, Ruth. You remember? You signed it when we handled the plumbing issue. It gave Ethan temporary rights over the property." My stomach turned. I remembered that morning, the pile of papers, her smile, her saying, "It's just utilities and repair forms." "You knew what you were doing," I said. My voice was steady now. "You lied." Ethan ran a hand through his hair. "We didn't lie. We just simplified things. We were drowning in debt, Mom. Nora's job cut hours, and we needed something to hold us over. We thought once the sale went through, we'd share the money. You'd get your part, and we'd start fresh." I stared at him. My son, the same boy who once cried when he broke my favorite mug, who used to promise he'd take care of me one day, now standing before me, justifying theft like it was a business decision. "And where's my part, Ethan?" I asked softly. His silence was answer enough. Nora crossed her arms tighter. "We invested it. It's tied up right now, but once it grows, you'll get more than what the house was worth." I laughed, not out of humor, but disbelief. "You sold my memories for an investment." Quote, "Don't be dramatic," she snapped, her patience cracking. "It was just a house. Just a house." That sentence hit harder than anything else. My husband built that porch with his own hands, sanding every rail until it shone like honey in the morning sun. Ethan learned to ride his bike on that gravel driveway. Every photo, every meal, every whispered prayer had been lived under that roof, and now she called it just a house. I stepped closer until our eyes met. "You might think you've won something, Nora, but you've lost more than you can imagine." Ethan reached out, maybe to touch my shoulder, but I stepped back. "Don't," I said. "You made your choice." I left before my voice broke. The cold air outside bit through my coat. I walked without direction, just letting the wind sting my face, because it was better than feeling nothing. That night, I went through old drawers at Lillian's place, looking for anything that proved ownership. And that's when I found it. A small fireproof box I hadn't opened since my husband's passing. Inside were the original deed papers, the insurance certificates, and, most important, A letter from my lawyer friend years ago confirming my full ownership. No mention of shared rights. The power of attorney Nora mentioned had been temporary, and it had expired before the sale date. For the first time in months, I felt my heart steady. There was still a path to justice. I spent the next week visiting a local attorney, Mr. Collins, an older man with kind eyes and a tired voice. He listened quietly as I explained everything, the timeline, the forms, the signatures. When I handed him the documents, he nodded slowly. "They sold it illegally, Mrs. Willis," he said, "and if your signature was misused, that's fraud. You have a case." Hearing those words felt like a hand gripping mine in the dark. Not vengeance, validation. The next day, a legal notice was sent to Ethan and Nora, requesting immediate contact and review of the property sale. I imagined their faces when they opened that envelope. Maybe guilt, maybe anger. I didn't know. I didn't care. When Ethan finally called, his voice was strained. "Mom, what are you doing? You'll ruin us." "You ruined yourself," I replied. "But maybe this will help you find out who you've become." He hung up. Lillian watched me that evening as I made tea. "You're stronger than you think," she said. "Maybe," I murmured, but I'd give anything not to have learned it this way. That night, I couldn't help wondering what kind of woman Nora really was, the one who smiled while taking something sacred from another person. Maybe she truly believed she was helping. Or maybe greed has a way of sounding like reason when you speak it often enough. Whatever her reasons, I was done being silent. I wasn't just reclaiming a house. I was reclaiming the part of myself that believed love meant never saying no. The morning the letter from their lawyer arrived, I was sitting on Lillian's porch, feeding crumbs to the sparrows. The envelope was thick and white, heavy with intention. I knew before I opened it that it would be ugly. Inside was a 2-page statement from a downtown law firm. It claimed that I had willingly transferred ownership and that my recent memory issues had caused confusion. I read that line twice, then again, as if my eyes were lying to me. Memory issues. I was 63, not senile. I managed my bills, cooked for myself, still volunteered at the church pantry. They were painting me as an old woman losing her mind, all to keep what they stole. Lillian slammed her teacup down when she read it. Oh, that girl picked the wrong mother-in-law to underestimate. But I didn't yell, I didn't curse. I did what my late husband Thomas used to call quiet work. That night, I gathered everything, every receipt, every tax record, the old repair invoices still in my filing box. I wanted a timeline that told the truth, not the one they'd rewritten. I even called our old family lawyer in Tulsa, who'd handled Thomas's estate years ago. He remembered me right away. "Ruth," he said, "you were always the one with the sharp memory. Let's fix this." Within a week, Mr. Collins and my old lawyer drafted a counterclaim citing fraud and misrepresentation. They filed a motion to freeze any profits from the house sale until an investigation could be completed. It felt strange, this sudden shift from grief to resolve, but also like breathing for the first time after being underwater too long. Then the calls began, first from Ethan. "Mom, please," he said, his voice cracking between guilt and fear. "You don't know what this will do to us." "I know exactly what it will do," I said quietly. "It will show the truth. You're ruining our lives." "No, Ethan, you ruined what we had. I'm just asking for it back." He started crying then, the way he used to when he scraped his knees as a boy, and for a second I almost softened. But the memory of that empty house, of my name erased, hardened me again. Then came Nora's call. Her voice, unlike his, carried no tremor. "Only steel. You're embarrassing yourself," she said. "Even if you win, you'll lose your son." "I already lost him the day you handed me those keys," I replied. She hung up without another word. The hearing date was set for March 12th. That morning, the courthouse smelled faintly of floor polish and cold air. I wore my navy dress, the one Thomas always said made me look steady. Ethan sat on one side of the aisle with Nora, their lawyer whispering into her ear. She looked immaculate, not a hair out of place, dressed like she belonged in a magazine. Ethan, on the other hand, couldn't meet my eyes. When it was my turn to speak, I stood at the witness stand, hands clasped to stop the shaking. The judge, an older woman with silver hair and soft eyes, asked me to tell my side. So I did. I told her about the papers I was asked to sign under false pretenses, about the missing documents, about how my late husband and I built that home board by board. I spoke not with anger but with something deeper, grief, the kind that comes when love turns into something unrecognizable. At one point, my voice wavered. I thought I might break. Then I saw Lillian sitting in the back row, nodding, her hands folded tight. I steadied myself. When the judge asked for evidence, my lawyer laid out every document: the expired power of attorney, the sale date that didn't align, the certified deed still bearing my signature. Each paper felt like a piece of myself stitched back together. Nora's lawyer objected, argued, twisted words. But truth has a way of sitting quietly and waiting its turn. When the judge finally spoke, the courtroom went still. Until further investigation, the court orders an immediate freeze on the sale proceeds. Ownership status remains under review. All parties are to cease property transfer activity. It wasn't victory yet, but it was the first step toward it. Afterward, outside the courthouse, Ethan approached me alone. His face was pale, his tie loosened. "Mom, I never wanted it to go this far," he said softly. I looked at him, really looked, and saw the boy I'd raised hiding behind a man he didn't recognize anymore. "Then stop letting her speak for you," I said. He opened his mouth, closed it again, and walked away. That night, back at Lillian's, I sat by the window watching the lights flicker across the valley. For the first time in months, I felt something close to peace. "Do you think you'll get the house back?" Lillian asked. "Maybe," I said, "but even if I don't, I'll make sure they remember who I am." She smiled faintly. "Ruth Willis doesn't disappear quietly." And she was right, because in the days that followed, I didn't hide. I spoke to neighbors, church friends, and old community members who'd known us for years. I told them the truth, calmly, without bitterness. I didn't need gossip to fight my battle. I needed witnesses, people who remembered how things used to be. Soon, word spread. It wasn't long before whispers began finding their way back to Nora. I knew because she stopped posting smiling family photos online. Her perfect image cracked the way frost splits old glass. Silently, but completely. And then, something unexpected happened. Ethan came to see me again, this time without her. He stood on Lillian's porch, hat in hand, looking older than his 35 years. "Mom," he said quietly, "I think I made the worst mistake of my life." I didn't speak. I just let him stand there, shifting under the weight of his own words. "I thought I was fixing things," he continued. "We were drowning in bills, and she said selling the house was temporary, that we'd buy it back after we got back on our feet. I didn't read the papers. I just signed." I looked at him, tired but not cruel. "Son, you can't fix lies with more lies." His eyes glistened. "Can I come home?" Quote. I hesitated, my throat tight. "You already are," I said. "But this time, you'll have to earn your way back." He nodded, tears spilling now, and for a brief moment, I saw the boy he used to be. But deep down, I knew redemption is never easy, and the reckoning wasn't over yet. The hearing might have ended, but the ripples it left behind traveled farther than I expected. In a small town, news moves fast. By the next week, I couldn't step into the grocery store without someone stopping to ask, "Ruth, are you all right?" Or, "Is it true what they say about your son and his wife?" Quote, I never answered with anger. I'd simply nod and say, "We're working through it." Because truth doesn't need shouting. It just needs time to breathe. But for Ethan and Nora, time wasn't so kind. Nora's law firm learned about the pending fraud case within days. One of the senior partners, a friend of my late husband, called me directly. He didn't pry, just said quietly, "We hold our associates to high ethical standards, Mrs. Willis. I'll handle it from here." A week later, word spread that Nora had been suspended pending review. Her professional smile faded from the firm's website, her perfect image erased with a click. I didn't celebrate. I didn't gloat. Justice, when it finally arrives, is rarely joyful. It's heavy, like the first rainfall after a long drought. It cleanses, but it also reminds you of everything that cracked while you waited. Ethan, on the other hand, kept his distance. He sent small gestures instead, a grocery cart in the mail, a bouquet left on the porch, unsigned but familiar. I knew they were from him. A son's guilt has a scent, a mix of apology and silence. Then one evening, there was a knock on Lillian's door. I opened it to find Nora standing there, coat buttoned tight, her face pale against the dusk. "May I come in?" she asked softly. I stepped aside. Lillian glanced at me, ready to hover nearby, but I shook my head. "It's all right." Nora sat on the couch, smoothing her gloves against her knees. For the first time since I'd met her, she looked small. Not the sharp, confident woman I remembered, but someone cornered by her own reflection. "I lost my job," she said quietly. "They're reviewing my license. Ethan's been staying at his friend's place." I nodded, saying nothing. She swallowed hard. "You were right. We shouldn't have done it. But you have to understand, we were desperate." Ethan's business was collapsing, and I thought, if we could just get through a few months, things would fix themselves. By stealing from me? Her eyes filled. I didn't see it that way then. I saw it as borrowing. We meant to make it right. I sighed. You can't make something right while it's built on a lie, Nora. It always sinks. For a long moment, silence hung between us. Thick, heavy. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a check. "This is what's left," she said. "It's not everything, but it's yours." I looked at the check but didn't touch it. "I don't want your money," I said quietly. "I want my name cleared, and I want you to remember what you cost this family." She nodded, tears falling fast now. "I know, and I'm sorry." I believe she meant it, at least in that moment. But sorry doesn't rebuild what's burned. It only stands there in the ashes, wishing. A month later, the judge's final decision came through. The court ruled in my favor. The sale was declared invalid due to forged authorization, and the property title was restored under my name. Ethan and Nora were ordered to pay restitution for damages, though I doubted I'd ever see much of it. When the clerk handed me the certified papers, my hands trembled, not from excitement, from release. It was like exhaling after months of holding my breath. Lillian insisted on baking a pie that night. "We're celebrating, whether you like it or not," she said, waving her apron. We sat on her porch with steaming plates and coffee. The spring air smelled of rain and lilacs. For the first time in months, I felt steady again. The next morning, I visited the house. The yard was overgrown, the porch paint chipped, but the bones were still there. My husband's old rocking chair leaned against the wall, the one piece no one had bothered to take. I sat down and let the wind brush across my face. The house didn't feel angry. It felt patient, like it had been waiting for me to come home. I heard a car pull up behind me. Ethan stepped out slowly, holding a small box. He looked thinner, humbled. "I figured you'd be here," he said quietly. I nodded, not moving from the chair. "This was never just a house, Ethan." He lowered his eyes. "I know, and I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to have this." He handed me the box. Inside were old family photos, the ones Nora had taken down months ago. The glass was cracked in a few frames, but the faces smiled the same. "I found them when we were moving out," he said. She wanted to throw them away, but I couldn't. My throat tightened. "Thank you." He stood there awkwardly for a moment before saying, "If you ever want to talk..." "I'm trying, Mom. I really am." I met his eyes, the same brown eyes that once looked up at me from a bicycle crash, asking if the bleeding would stop. "I know," I said softly. "Just make sure the next thing you build is worth keeping." He nodded, tears catching in his lashes, then walked away without another word. When he drove off, I looked back at the house. The wind rustled the curtains through an open window, whispering through the empty rooms like a sigh. I didn't feel victorious. I felt human, tired, grateful, changed. Because sometimes justice isn't loud. It's quiet. It's the sound of keys resting again in the palm of the person who truly earned them. Spring came gently that year. The dogwoods bloomed early, white petals scattering like soft confetti over the front steps of the house I had fought to reclaim. Every morning, I'd open the windows wide and let the scent of lilac and fresh-cut grass drift in. It smelled like forgiveness trying to find its way home. At first, I didn't plan to live there again. Too many ghosts lingered in those walls. I'd thought about selling it, maybe giving the money to charity, maybe starting somewhere new. But one evening, as the sun dipped low and turned the curtains gold, I heard Thomas's voice in memory, calm, steady, practical. You don't run from what's yours, Ruth. You tend to it until it's right again. So I stayed. The first few weeks were quiet work, repainting the kitchen cabinets, scrubbing floors that had been left dull with neglect. Lillian helped on weekends, humming old hymns as she swept. We didn't talk much about what had happened. We didn't need to. Some hurts are better healed in the rhythm of shared silence. Neighbors began stopping by. Mr. Harris from 2 doors down brought homemade pickles. Mrs. Bowen left a pie on the porch. Nobody asked for details. Their presence was enough. There's something about small towns. They grieve with you, quietly, like family. One afternoon, while trimming the rosebush by the porch, I saw Ethan's car slowing near the curb. He didn't pull in, just sat for a moment watching. Then he lifted a hand, a small, uncertain wave. I raised mine back. That was the beginning. Weeks passed before he had the courage to stop. When he finally did, he came without Nora. He looked worn, but lighter somehow, as if he'd been carrying a weight he'd finally decided to set down. I'm working 2 jobs now, he told me, sitting on the porch steps like he used to as a boy, trying to pay off what we owe. Nora's staying with her parents. She doesn't talk much these days. I nodded. People make choices they have to live with, Ethan. Some lessons come slow. He stared at his hands. I don't know how to make this right. Start by showing up, I said simply. Every day. And don't lie. Not even a little. He nodded, tears glinting but unshed. I can do that. Quote. Over the following months, he did just that. He stopped by every Sunday with groceries or tools to fix something around the house. We didn't rehash the past. Sometimes he'd work in the garden while I cooked. Other times, we'd sit in easy silence, the distance between us shrinking one quiet moment at a time. As for Nora, she never came back. I heard through the grapevine that she'd taken a job 2 states away. I didn't wish her harm. I hoped, in some corner of her heart, she'd remember that trust, once broken, is harder to rebuild than any house. By midsummer, the home was alive again. Curtains danced in the breeze, the floorboards creaked in familiar ways, and every evening I'd sit on that same porch where this story began, a cup of tea warming my hands, the world softening under the pink glow of sunset. Sometimes I'd hear Ethan whistling in the yard, and I'd think of all the mothers who've had to learn that love doesn't mean blind trust. It means strength enough to set boundaries and grace enough to forgive when the time is right. The past still hurt, yes, but it no longer owned me. One evening, as fireflies began to appear, Ethan turned to me and said quietly, "Mom, I still can't believe you forgave me." I smiled. Forgiveness isn't for you, son. It's for me. I refuse to let bitterness live rent-free in my heart. He laughed softly, shaking his head. You sound like Dad. Maybe that's the best compliment I could get, I said. We sat there until the sky turned to velvet and the crickets started their nightly choir. The house behind us creaked gently, like it was breathing again. That's when I realized something. All those years I thought the house was my greatest treasure, but it wasn't. It was the people, the memories, the courage to rebuild, even after betrayal. That was the real inheritance. When I finally locked up that night, I placed the house keys on the kitchen counter, the same spot where Nora had once handed them to me, and whispered a small prayer of thanks. Not for revenge, not even for justice, but for peace. Because peace, I've learned, doesn't come from winning. It comes from knowing you survived with your heart intact. Sometimes life takes the things we build with love and hands them to the wrong people, just to see if we'll still have the strength to rebuild. I lost my home once, but I found something bigger in return. Myself. There's a quiet kind of justice in standing tall without shouting, in choosing dignity over vengeance. Because when everything is stripped away, the walls, the furniture, even the people you thought you could trust, what remains is your character. And that's something no one can sell, no matter how many papers they sign. So if you ever find yourself betrayed by the ones you love most, remember this: forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means freeing yourself from the weight of their choices. Tell me, would you have fought the way I did? Or would you have walked away and started fresh somewhere new? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. Stories of heart, of loss, and of finding the strength to begin again.